When he was about to speak, he cites 2 class raptors rank 2 monsters and immediately asks her to ready herself. Jarian had never been trained before. His current skill set was earned by risking his life inside dungeons. But when he was young, he keenly watched his father movements while he practiced. That itself had gifted him with 3 abilities. Foremost, Needleware used all his speed, power, and weight to stab at an enemy's vital points. It was a simple yet complex move he had earned himself with experience, sense, and talent. A technique even high rankers struggled to achieve had been learned by him. They pause and discuss. Since claws raptors only moved in groups of 5 or more, they conclude that there were all kinds of monsters inside, baited by the royal jelly. While he decides on a quick break, Jar Young asks him of her previous query. He replies saying all he did was watch someone train, but since it was done sneakily, he could only learn 3 moves. She mockingly looks at him, relaying how she disliked him. She passes him a stamina ample, which he pockets, considering the price he'd avail on selling it. She confirms that he was totally weird. Since she had drank the potion, he decides to make a move. He reminds her of their motives once more as they snuck behind some bushes. They were not to hunt but grab their needs and immediately leave. She was also to follow every single of his commands, and he also informs her that, as she might have deduced already, his ability was surviving. Sarum was confused at the emotions inside her. Since the past half year, everyone had mistreated her. It was the first time ever she was raiding a dungeon with a companion. As they enter through the doorway to the mall, they notice a horrifying sight of high-ranking monster corpses sprawled across the floor. Jaryong asks her to stabilize herself, since although it was scary, she had expected some strong creature inside. It was just a tad bit messy. She exclaims at the sight of a monster lying a far way inside the corridor. With his staff, charges at the monster. It was a slasher lip, a monster whose rank varied from 2 to 3 stars. It elongates its gigantic tongue towards the charging Jarian. When he tries to sweat it out of his way, the tongue coils around his staff, taking him by surprise. He lets go of his staff, which jams the monster's mouth and jumps high above it. He then dives at him foot first. He stomps at his eye directly as it lets out an agonizing scream. When Jean asks him to finish it off, our Gigachad brain Jarian replies saying he had kept it alive to serve as an alarm to them. The slasher lip had a tendency to howl to alert its allies when it finds its life in danger. When she questions whom, an unknown voice speaks. Me, an evident adventurer who had a long sword perched at his waist, Jan explaining that killing the monsters below had left him exhausted. He first thinks of them to be young smobblers, but after spotting the Warrior High logo on Sarum's t-shirt, swiftly jumps down inquiring of her. He says that although it was unfortunate she was to die there, Jaryung informs her that he was no adventurer she was probably picturing. He was a villain who was after him in the royal jelly. He asks him of how he would deal with Jirian's commissioner and touch his possessions without his permit. He mockingly states that it would only happen considering he was caught, and he was an extremely lucky guy. He had previously coincidentally heard of his comrade smuggling something valuable. He had planned to kill the royal jelly smuggler, his previous comrade, on contact, but had unfortunately failed to finish him off. His wounded colleague had run inside the mall and hid in one of the many smuggling locations inside. Jaryong now understood the reason why contact and information had ceased during the mission. Although they hadn't clashed yet, he was certain that the hunter was a genuine adventurer. He was in a completely different league than the bodyguard he had previously fought. He asked Jean to quickly seek the coin she was in search of and leave while he bought time. The hunter sneaks in towards his face, his sword charged right front. He urges her to leave since she needed to exist for him to avail his payment. Jaryung blocked the sword with his staff as Jean ran away. The adventurer judges it to be a bad deal, but Jarian knew better. He exudes a hefty deal of aura and slashes with his staff. The hunter was now baffled at how his sword path was red, and while on his thoughts, Jarian kicks him in the face. He rises, speaking of how surprised he was that he had forced him into using his equipment. He had looked down upon him since he was just a youngster, but realizing that he was better than the average pros, he had to fight him properly considering the other escape. He asks him not to worry since it won't be long. His name was Young Dog Yune, gold-ranked hunter. A while back, after the clash of Jaryung and Pilju, Yiyuan was now munching at some ramen while the client was looking at the still body of Pilju. He spoke of how Pilju had been bossing around previously, acting arrogantly, but Ian states that he had not lost because he was weak, but because he had to. He explains that adventurers did not fight solely with humans. Pilju might have previously trained in hunting and exploring rather than fighting. Jaryung was unlike any individual he had fought before. He was a smuggler. At the inexperienced Pilju had displayed, he stammers about how hunters had been fighting from time to time. Juan certifies that even killed their own comrades at times, if driven by greed. One question, a hunter could even state them to have died at the hands of monsters. Pilju might have been forced into retirement after some infighting outside of a dungeon, probably after some argument, and without any equipment. When he queries if they really made a big difference, he nods, stating that with it, Pilju might have even won the fight. Equipments were half the combat power of 100. Jarian recalls, although they were considerably strong, Domian's own skills were doubtful since he had failed to avoid his kick. Dongyan strikes with his sword, which he blocks using his staff. While speaking, he kicks him in the stomach, sending him far across the place. As Jaryong pauses, he closes in and slash multiple times at him, making cuts and bruises on his body. Dong-yun mockingly asks him to fight properly like was earlier, but it was impossible for him to. Dong-yun was equipped with a plus rank armor known as the Shade Jacket. It utilized the user's blood to physically empower the upper defenses of the user, and that had led to billions berserker-styled combat although openings were to appear. Certainly if he approached carelessly he would definitely die. On suddenly slashes at his chest, taking him by surprise as he exclaims at his decency. Jar-young throws his jacket regretfully since he quite liked it. Jar-young states that he was way inferior than he had imagined since it was previously intimidated by the huge amounts of aura he emitted. He had barely been able to scratch him, a high schooler who had no equipment at all and was totally being carried by his armor. Dong-yun gets totally pissed at such remarks and curses at him. Jar-young was certain that Dong-yun was in a rush, since he had to defeat him, find Serum and then silence her. The longer he stalled for time, the more impatient he would grow as they are about to clash. Jar-young too now charges in, enveloping himself in aura. In his childhood he had learned a second technique while watching his father, but it wasn't possible solely with his strength. He had to implement the force of Dunyan's force against him. It was a skill he had yet to perfect. Its name was Swell. He literally blasts a minion far away. He himself had suffered injuries executing that move since he had never expected to use it in a fight. He had never imagined a pro to repeatedly charge, and like an impatient human he asks him to give up since even the duration of his equipment was about to expire. Curses in him as he uses a small dagger and stabs himself dead center, determined to kill him no matter what. As previously explained, his armor heightened his performance using his blood. Meanwhile, Jean Serum was running through the 5th floor of the mall as she came across the coin box she was searching for. As she places her hand on it, her arrival and completion is announced by the box. When she is about to return, a tremor shocks the entire building. She recalls of Jar-young asking her to run as he stalled for time as she stood in the hallway. She tried, considering that even if she ran away nothing would change for her. Dong-yun recalls of his past, of how he had once beaten up a guy for his arrogance. He was a genius. Since a young age he had known that everything was easy talent, adults, recognition and acknowledgement, and even dominance amongst his peers, but there was a single thing he wasn't able to achieve. His application had been rejected by the Warrior High School. He reasoned, thinking it was all about money and connections. He admitted himself into another school, thinking it would fare him solely on skills and talent. Here too he dominated the others and always ranked the highest. Eventually he was selected as a genius and became a predicted ranker of the future. On the day of graduation, when his teacher congratulated him, he silently mocked him, thinking he had retired early and became obsolete to teach students. He's determined to dust him. One day we find a blood-covered Dong-yun cowering on the ground. All of his teammates were killed by a single monster. Another hunter had come to rescue and saved him, but when he approaches Don Nealon he is stared down upon, similar to how he himself used to on others. He finally realized that his teacher's words were but a consolation to him, that he wasn't a chosen one but just another average individual, just a little better. Donnie now says that equipped Jacked was made out of a live vampire who had agreed to pull all his blood into him as the price to kill Jari, and Jar-young distances himself, saying that he wasn't certain of what he just said, but it indeed was quite dangerous. Closes in on him with his enormous claw-like arm. Their strikes meet. Jar-young analyzes that his speed had not magnified. He yet again extends his arm towards Jari and he praises him for have somehow blocked his attacks. Although he was now significantly bleeding, he furnishes the stamina ample Jean had previously given him and chugs it. Daniel commands his great reaction speed and talent and thanks him for the opportunity to let him stomp a talented person. He gleefully smiles and rushes in towards him. After drinking the potion, Jarian was grateful his body was moving proportionally. The war-crazed monster Dong-yun consecutively strikes at him, excited in his movements. Jar-young judges that since he was using his blood as a fuel for the equipment, he would definitely hit a bar. He plans to stall for time, bait him into rapidly consuming his blood and use his. That's it for today. If you like this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.